my name is Stephanie and welcome to Sewing with Stephanie. As you know, this is the place where we make sewing cool, modern, and fun. I'm going to teach you how to make awesome dresses like this one that I made, but first you have to learn the fundamentals. And one of the most basic things to learn is called the slash and spread technique. The difference between the slash and spread technique and draping is that the slash and spread technique is purely done in paper on a table. That's why it's synonymous with flat pattern making, whereas draping, you are working organically on the mannequin. I personally love flat pattern making. It's my favorite because I can do it all on the table, and if I know exactly what I'm creating already, it's a much quicker process. I'm going straight to the pattern instead of draping first. In order to get started with your flat pattern making, it's really vitally important that you have created a sloper already. I created a sloper and traced it onto cardboard. First, I draped the basic bodice, front and back. Then I trued it up, which means I converted it to a paper pattern. And both of those videos are available to you, and the links to those videos are below. I took that paper pattern and then turned it into a cardboard pattern. Once you have this, you're good to go. The difference is with this cardboard pattern is that it has 0 seam allowance at all. So whereas in the video you saw me show how to put seam allowance onto your patterns, in this video you use a sloper with no seam allowance. Then make sure that you have notches marking the front and back armholes, as well as the base of the darts or any dart legs. I also have popped a hole at the top of the dart end so that I can easily mark that and connect the dot. In order to get started, I've created several copies of tracing paper versions of my front bodice, which is what all we're gonna deal with today. And then make sure you have scissors, tape, and a marking pen. Let's go ahead, write in and get started with one of our copies. So right now we've got just the front dart marked out. I suggest cutting, you can cut it out completely, or just cut out one leg. Use some pieces of tape and really connect those 2 seam lines. At the beginning, you might want to use more tape. Then, what you basically have is a 3D version of the bodice. So you have the apex point lifted out because of that giant dart we've taken. Now that we have a 3D version of our bodice, the point of flat pattern making is to slash and spread it until it becomes a flat pattern. So let's start with something very basic, like a princess seam. You often see princess seam in garments, and that comes straight from that existing dart line all the way up to the shoulder line. It could also go into the armhole if you want. So I'm gonna flip this so that I can draw on it. I'm gonna draw that princess seam. You can draw it however you want. I'm gonna tell you that it looks pretty straight, right? Pretty good for a first draft. And then we're gonna cut along that seam line. Right away, you can see the side piece is flat, as well as the front piece. I can cut away that remaining dart so it doesn't confuse us. So basically, by cutting through that apex point, I slashed right through it and created 2 flat pieces. And now instantly, you have turned your basic bodice into a princess seam bodice. Easy. Now you can true those patterns up and done. Perfect. Now I'm going to create another one. Okay, so I've taped up this tracing paper copy, and again, you've got the apex point sticking out. Now, let's lower that neckline, right? Let's create a V-neck. We don't want it to be a crew neck. Create a V-neck. Okay. And then, what if we created another seam line, maybe like a sweetheart neckline up over the bust? So let's create a sweetheart seam. And sometimes it's best to do this on your mannequin. So if you have a mannequin, to hold this right up to your mannequin so that you have something to draw into. Makes it a little tricky when you're just drawing on air. But we've got a little bit of a sweetheart neckline here, okay? Now, first things first, I don't want this center front, this piece. I want it to have a lower neckline. Now we've got a V neckline. Now let's cut along that sweetheart and see what happens. shoot, now I have one flat piece here, which you could see if the paper wasn't curved, but I still have the point here with the bust line. And because of that, I know I have to create another seam or another dart. You cannot leave any pattern piece where it's sticking up like that. So maybe instead of putting a regular dart there, maybe, let's see what happens if we were to remove it this way. Oh, look at that. Now I've released that fullness, but I've created this extra space here. What does that mean? That's called ease. So if you wanted, you could, well, I'm gonna even out my ease. You could retape this onto another piece of tracing paper with that piece in the middle. And what you've created is ease that you have to slightly gather or pull into this curved seam line. That way there's no additional dart or seam, but you may see a tiny little bit of gathers or maybe just a little bit of fullness, which is pushing the fullness towards the apex. There's a couple ways to do ease. So the way I did it was in two separate locations. You'll often see it done just right along the middle, right along that dart line. And the great thing about slash and spread is that I can say, oh, you know what, I don't want it in the middle, or I don't want it on the sides, I want it on the middle. And then you know what, you just tape those pieces back together. If you make a mistake, just tape it all back together. That's great. And now you said, okay, well, I just have one spot that I'm gonna create the ease. Does that make sense? So now you've created two pattern pieces. One, they're both flat, it has a V neckline, but what we've done is we've created an exaggerated curve on the lower half, which will need to get gathered into this top curve in order to create that fullness. Okay, let's try another one. Okay, so for my next example, I'm gonna go back to that princess seam that I've already used, and I re-taped up that line. So now let's turn that princess seam line into maybe a tank top. Let's lower the neckline completely, and maybe it's just straight across from the princess line. So first thing I'm going to cut away this extra piece that we don't want. Okay. Now I still have the fullness, but you can decide, oh, I actually like the thickness of the strap. Maybe you want to add a little bit back in to make it a wider strap. That is up to you. You're the designer now. So let's say we want this front middle section, which remember it's going to be cut on fold or however you decide. Let's say we want this front middle section to be gathered along this line, okay? So what we can decide first, what we should do is we should add some notches in here. So I'm gonna add a notch here, and I'm gonna add a double notch here, so that we know this piece goes into this piece. Okay. I'm gonna cut back up, that's right, back up through that princess seam line, and we have two pieces. Okay, but I haven't created this gather. How is that gonna create a gather? Well, the next move to do would be what we call spread. So you have learned the slash technique, which gets rid of any of the fullness. Spread is how you add additional fullness. So if we want to add additional fullness and we are going to gather into this seam, what we need to do is make this piece bigger. It needs to be bigger. So I'm going to cut right several points, right through the middle of it. And then very, very important when you do this is to number them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I have 5 different pieces. After you've numbered your pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's important to note how much fullness you want to add. So if I was to spread them apart about even this way, the size of the pieces are the same as the size of the gaps. That's double the fullness. And you have to think about really how that's going to look. This is why we create muslin versions of clothing after we create the pattern, because you might not like that much fullness. You might actually decide, you know what, I only want a little bit of gathers. So I'm just going to expand them by about 1 inch. Now if you do that, You're gonna lay these back out on another piece of tracing paper. And you want to make sure everything is lined up perfectly. And you're gonna go ahead and retape every one of these down. Once all of your pieces are taped down, go ahead and shrew up this pattern like you would any pattern. So this is the center front here, so I want to make sure that that's a straight line. And then I'm going to kind of connect these here for the princess seam line. That just gives me a rough idea of what that pattern shape looks like. Well, not rough, exact shape. You can double check that you have your notches in place so that when you gather up this piece, you know exactly where you are gathering to because you have those notches. And then we go back in just like with any other pattern piece and add our seam allowance. So I'm not adding a seam allowance to the center front here because it's going to be cut on fold. So I write CF for center front and then make the lines for cut on fold. You can write it as well. You can say princess, seam, tank, center, panel, cut, 1 on fold. And then be sure to go back through and add your seam allowance. As I talked about in my video about truing up your paper pattern, you can choose what seam allowance is best for you. I learned 1/2 inch, I do 1/2 inch. Some people like to do 5/8, which gives them a little bit more wiggle room, and that's completely fine. I would recommend going back and watching that video if you need a refresher. Make sure you mark out those notches, and then you will take down your other pattern piece as well on a larger piece of paper, add the seam allowance, and do the same thing, right? Princess, seam, tank, side, front panel. That makes sense for you, whatever makes sense. And cut 2. Make sure you go ahead and add the grain line on this piece because it may not be readily obvious. Because this one is a cut on fold, you don't need to add the grain line. If you want to go ahead and add it, you can. It's really up to you. And there you would have a tank that I'll draw it out for you. It will look like really sweet drawing here. Gathers like that across the front. Simple. How easy was that, right? Now that you have the fundamentals, you are well on your way to creating many of your own patterns. My next video is going to show you how to create 3 different designer tops using that same slash and spread technique. Thank you so much for following along. I really hope you loved this video. Please leave me comments if you have any questions or want to give me any advice for these videos. Thank you so much. Have a great day.